Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Rehman Yousuf Abdulrehman. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And so the first question is the toughest, and then we just want to get it out of the way. How would
Okay.
you briefly describe yourself? What would you say to our audience here?
Uh, I try not to describe myself professionally, but I'm a clinical and consulting psychologist, and I'm an author. I've written three books, and I'm working on editing a fourth book, which will be out soon. Um, yeah, and a long time ago, I used to write poetry. So that's me.
Awesome. Oh, you used to write poetry. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Today we want to talk about your book, your novel, your best-selling novel, Jinn in the Family.
Yes.
And yeah, it's just the word jinn as well brings takes us to places that we want and don't want to go. It's that kind of the idea of possession and so on. And so it's quite fascinating just on its own, but also that a clinical psychologist would write about that. So,
Yeah.
how did this idea come about first before we dive into the novel itself?
Yeah. Well, so my family's originally from Zanzibar.
Mhm.
And like Venice, Zanzibar Island is one of the most haunted places on Earth, apparently, allegedly. Um, and so, my family always grew up with this folklore of the jinn, and it's been a part of that culture for a very long time. The book I started a very long time ago. Like this, I've been sitting on this book since I was 21.
Mhm.
And I've always wanted in some ways record at least a fictionalized account of some of the folklore and family and the interesting stories that came from Zanzibar. But of course, I'm a lot older now and things change, so I've pretty much rewritten the whole book. Um, and I think it's a much more in-depth story now, and it's fiction, but it's also based on um, folklore. And I think this big question, as you alluded to, the beginning, is like having a psychologist write about the jinn and possession, like that's a odd concept. But that's inherent in the book as well too. And I mean, I wrote it also because, I mean, writing makes me happy, right? I've been in practice both as a clinical and a consulting psychologist for many years now. And as a just a form of self-care, I recognize like how much I needed to get back to this creative side that kind of filled my cup, um, and allowed me to be better at my work if I was able to do the things that made me happy. And writing poetry and prose and stuff like that has always been something that made me happy. This is my first crack at fiction, so to speak. But it was certainly a fulfilling thing to do, at least creatively. And I think that's the combination of all those things led me to write this book.
Yeah, and I love the introduction. You said, okay, well, talking like professionally, how do I define myself? Because on my podcast, we have people who wear many hats, and so which hat do you want me to talk about here? And all of them are
Yeah.
fine, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's something we forget too when we see like a psychologist, a doctor, or a police officer. There's like so many different layers to them, like different interests that they have. They're not just confined to like their job or what they do and things similar to that. So I find that fascinating that people branch out. Somebody, me and myself, I have so many different interests, sometimes conflicting interests too. So that's
Yes,
kind
it's
of
true.
fascinating. So just before we start talking about what the novel is about, kind of as a synopsis, I'd like to just start off with what's Jinn? Like, can we explain to our audience what are jinns? What do they do? And the
Yeah.
folklore that you talked about.
Yeah. Well, most people would recognize the word genie. And
Hmm.
that's the term we're familiar with in the West, Aladdin and his lamp and his genie. But genie is actually a mispronounced, it's like an anglicized pronunciation of an Arabic word, which is jinni. And jinni refers to a singular powerful jinn, which fits the whole folklore of Aladdin and his lamp. Jinn can be used both individually, or pluralistically to describe um, a being. So, according to Islamic folklore and Islamic theology, that there were several types of creations created at the beginning of time. That there were angels created out of white light, that there were jinn created out of a smokeless fire, and then there was carbon-based life forms like animals and humans that were made out of earth. And so there's those elemental pieces that come into creation. And so jinn were a creation, and Muslims believe that the devil was a jinn, that not all jinn are devils, but
Mhm.
that Satan himself or Shaitan was a jinn. And so there's this very old theology and folklore around the jinn in Muslim cultures and also in many cultures who aren't Muslim but come from, the global south, that's there. And so the jinn are basically these spirits, or what we would refer to as ghosts, only they're not the spirits of dead people. They are a separate creation, according to folklore, that live on a parallel plane to human beings.
Yeah, I love that because there's this like new category, new dimension because we have humans, we have the angels who would always follow good and God's will and command,
Yeah,
and they're not free. The angels are not free. They have to follow what
correct.
God says, right?
Yes.
But these jinns are kind of like humans, but with superpowers, and they
Yeah.
have free will, and they can be good or bad. I mean, with Aladdin, the genie. It depends who gets them, right? Because you get your
Yes.
three wishes. And so if you have an evil dictator, it's like, oh
Right.
no, right? That's no good.
Right.
So I find that interesting that they are kind of like humans too. They have this free will and so that puts them in a specific place.
It does, and I liked writing about them, and I liked writing about them from this cultural perspective because I think, like from a Western perspective, the way we approach horror
Hmm.
or ghost stories is like this real duality, right, of good versus evil.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because from many Muslim cultures, that's not the case.
Hmm.
Right? There's many shades of gray when it comes to the supernatural world. And those layers of gray all show up in Jinn and the Family. And I like approaching it from that nuanced perspective where, as you said, like they're like humans, right? They are
Yeah.
people with, and there are Jinn in this book that are like people. They're characters. And so what do we take from that? And
And do they change? I was like, I like to do gin study as like psychological studies. Like they change due to their experience, perhaps, and they become good Janes, even though they started off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, and I kind of dive into that with some of the
Cool.
characters in this book. It's like, what makes them who they are?
Yeah.
Why do they have, why are they responding the way that they're responding? It's interesting because even as humans, as a psychologist, I'd say we try, but we don't always successfully understand the rationale for people. We put labels on people, well, people like you and I who come probably from a similar part of the world,
Mhm.
we get labels and people never want to look at the perspective as to why people have certain feelings.
Mhm.
But we
Mhm.
try. We do a good job when it comes. We try to do a better job with human beings. We're like, okay, we have all science, but this folklore around the jinn, it's interesting. We take a rather Western theological approach of,
Mhm.
good versus evil, and I think
Mhm.
the Eastern approach, the Islamic approach, is far more nuanced. Where we're like, wait a second, why don't we understand why they did what they did?
Yeah.
And even though it's fiction, I like exploring that because I think through horror and through magical realism, sometimes those metaphors open up insights and awareness
Yeah.
for us as human beings, right? So even when we're reading fiction, we can gain wisdom and knowledge. Not to say that my book has wisdom or knowledge, but sometimes when we read about characters, it allows us to have some insight into ourselves.
Yeah, and that was something that was ongoing now in Western culture too, of like being possessed, or again, that you like madness presented with like you're not being yourself, you something is controlling you, and you lose your mind, and so that kind of thing has also existed on our side, especially during medieval times, where I find it's unnecessary malign. There's so much like beauty in that, so much magic. I love the view of it, right? Whereas like then we get to enlightenment where you just strip away all the fun stuff of life,
Yeah,
right?
it's
And
true.
so it's like what are we doing? And so but again, diving into that and seeing things again in a different perspective, but that's always existed and in a way still exists today. We might assume there's like you being possessed. This is not really who you are in many ways.
And this is the tricky part. So what you said has a couple of different components to it.
Hmm.
So number one, there's a psychological component. is
Hmm.
like, really, and the main character in the book, who I base loosely, like his experience in some of my travels
Hmm.
to Zanzibar, because I taught in Zanzibar and Dar es Salaam for about 10 years on and
Hmm.
off. Um, and I would see very interesting things that didn't always fit our standardized view of what psychosis looks like.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's interesting where we have Western medicine and, with these Western kind of very discrete categories. And then we have these wastebasket diagnosis that if we can't explain it, it just all goes into this wastebasket diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so I think that's interesting. And I think the book also challenges, like the balance between Eastern versus Western medicine and traditional knowledge. And, you know, where does what come in and do we have to always place Western medicine at the top, or is there room, is there a place for an Eastern perspective? So there's that. Um, and then and then to me, there's also the interesting component of the nuance of culture. As you said, it's always been there,
Yeah.
removing the fun stuff.
Yeah.
It's funny, like again, we think about like the witch trials here in Salem.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's like, and the Western world had certainly looked at anybody who engaged in this stuff as witches, and
Yeah.
certainly there were words like that in Eastern culture. But it's interesting, like Islamic culture. Yes, you're technically not supposed to do stuff with the jinn, but there is a magical element
Yeah.
to Islam that most people don't recognize,
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you're not
Hmm.
automatically a bad guy or a bad woman
Hmm.
because you have certain intuitions, right?
Yeah.
And in Islam doesn't look at somebody having supernatural ability as somebody who is an automatic witch, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
and I refer to this in the book. So one of the things was happy about is that, I pull in certain cultural metaphors and references that I think people can learn from. And there was something that I remember learning when I was a kid, that in Islamic tradition, that there were 19 angels that stood guard over hellfire, each of them representing a sense of the human being.
Hmm.
And I was like, that's fascinating because we think of in West, like in modern science, we refer to our five senses.
Hmm.
But according to Islamic theology, 19, all right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff in that theology that if you look at it, you're like, it refers to these extra senses beyond our, materialistic senses.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so there's 19 chapters in the book, 19 senses,
Oh, I see.
you
Okay.
know.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
but I love how, and I'm not making any claims of what's right and what's wrong in this book. This is a fiction book, but I love the ability to play with that,
Hmm.
with those narratives and tradition and folklore that we typically don't see in
Hmm.
Western literature and storytelling.
Yes. I just want to quickly clarify that I don't think witches are fun.
Oh,
Yeah, and
it
just
can be.
but again, that it's on, but the point is it's on the spectrum anyway. So
Yeah,
good versus evil, and even
all
like
right.
science versus tradition and spirituality. And so it's kind of shifting in different ways. And that is absolutely fascinating. It's not one or the other. And I
Well,
love that. Yeah.
well, and I like the idea of the spectrum. It's interesting because I mean, modern psychology, CBT, acceptance and commitments therapy, dialectical behavior therapy. I mean, mindfulness, all of those things have actually taken
Hmm.
practices from Eastern philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? So, I think when we open ourselves up to ideas and different perspectives, sometimes we may see benefit from Eastern perspectives instead of assuming that we're always right because we come from the West.
Hmm. Exactly. And so let's dive into the story. What's happening in it? Who are some of the main characters? And
Yeah,
yeah, any themes as well. Themes I think we touched upon a bit, but
yeah, we did.
what happens in the story?
So the book is based from a first person from an unnamed narrator, and he's a Western trained psychologist who travels back to uh, Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, and Zanzibar, and basically is challenged with identity.
Hmm.
So holding to this rope of science and this rigidity of the Western view of things. And it's interesting because the West often tends to look at the East
Hmm.
far more rigid, and that couldn't be further from the truth. And loosening up that mindset that he has by through his experiences there. And so the book goes back and forth in timelines where it goes, it starts off with, it starts off with the main character, but then it goes back and forth between historical like ancestors that he has. And
Mm,
it starts off not so distant, and then goes further distant, and it goes even further distant. And so it's this back and forth and this back and forth. And the back and forth is like a nice metaphor for I I I think cultural identity. Like
mhm,
on its surface level, the book is a ghost story. Um, but I think ghosts and jinn are kind of like metaphors for culture and identity for many people of the global south in the diaspora, right? Where we battle
mhm,
with identity and we're
mhm,
almost like haunted by culture and cultural identity,
mhm,
where we must put it away, put it away. That's not scientific. Like
mhm,
it's not just ghosts that are unscientific, but our identities, our Eastern identities are not accepted. And so we must accept this Western white view of the world. And
mhm,
that's ultimately the heart of the book, but it's done in a way that talks about the engagement that this main character's ancestors, who are the other main characters of the book, have with the supernatural world in Zanzibar. And then in doing so, it interweaves also the history of Zanzibar, the revolution in Zanzibar, the people that came there, and what led to where this main character is now, but also where I would say the perspective of the world is now when it comes to looking at East versus West.
mhm. How do the jinns come into play here? Are there like characters that like
There are.
just
There's
okay, cool.
absolute characters, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're main characters. I mean, the cover of the book is actually a main character. So,
Mhm.
on the cover of the book, for those watching on YouTube, is a jinn. And it's
And
a
it doesn't look like a good one, that one.
no, it doesn't look like a good one. But I mean, but as you read the chapter, you question that. You
Huh.
question whether they're good or bad, right? And this gin is actually a well-known, like there's some very old folklore in Zanzibar about a gin called Popobawa, and and it's a stereotypical bad guy, but the book kind of breaks that down, and they goes into the depth of this character a little bit more as to why, what is he bad or is he?
In a way, we have that with the devil too, because there are certain things we kind of understand. Was an angel too. Like there was the goodness there, and that's quite
Yeah,
fascinating. But it's also like it symbolizes also like when you talk about ancestors and so on, different forms of trauma that exist in a family from the past and also in the
yeah,
present. And I think my family has always had a jinn around and causing
yeah,
discord and so on. But I think that's also interesting to look at other causes, not just us in a family. There's like it's like a wider panorama. There are different factors that we don't really realize often too.
yes, and being open to cultural points of view.
Hmm.
I mean, there are times where like I have seen patients in the Western world who come from indigenous cultures,
Hmm.
or other cultures, and they don't meet criteria for psychosis at all. Otherwise completely lucid, but they have this perspective. And it's like, what would happen if somebody who didn't understand where they were coming from, did not understand the cultural leaning of this? And there's a real danger, in misdiagnosing people. I mean, I've seen people who have clear on psychosis who are falsely labeled as being, possessed. I'm like, no, this is just schizophrenia, right? Like, this
Hmm.
is a set of criteria. This is what it means. And then there's sometimes some interesting experiences where you're like, what do I do with this?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I talk about a couple of those experiences, and through the perspective of this character, it's like, what do I do with that experience?
Hmm.
Does the world allow that? Does the white and Western world allow for that experience? How do we interpret that? You
Yeah,
know?
and it's an artificial dividing line there because it's like it's okay to talk to God, but when God talks back to you,
Yeah,
that's
that's
not
true.
good, right? So it's
That's
it's kind of
true.
artificial. It's only
Yes,
one
that's
way.
true. Yeah, when God
Yeah,
talks back,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. And
Right.
so how do the jinn manifest themselves in like folklore and also in your book potentially? Like how do they show themselves to the people, the family?
So yeah, without giving away too much,
Mhm.
um, I mean, in some ways they show up very literally,
Mhm.
right?
Like
very
you see
much.
them, they're visible
They're visible,
in
yeah.
dreams
They're-
or in actual life.
sorry?
In dreams, do they come in dreams, or is it in like real life? They see them like, oh my God, is somebody watching me now?
In the book, it's both.
Okay, cool.
And that's the piece. So the book is like on it sits on the cusp of like many people who've read this book are like, I don't know whether I should believe this to be real or fiction, right? Like it's just close. And I wanted the book to reflect the experiences that people of all backgrounds have had with the supernatural. All of us have had an experience where like, what was that? Like I know I'm not crazy, but what was that?
Yeah, we've had
Where
ghosts in place before. Yeah,
Yeah. Where do I put that experience,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the book does that. And so the historical pieces are the ones where, where the characters are being described through story is very clear.
Hmm.
It's definitive as actual characters. But
Hmm.
as we approach modernity, as away from the antiquity, now there's lack of surety.
Hmm.
And so the characters, the Jinn show up very clear in the past. And I think that's a metaphor that almost in the past there was room for that conversation.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
as we move into modernity, there's no room for that. And so as a result of that, these characters are, there's a question, you
Hmm.
know, is this character really seeing what they think they're seeing?
Hmm. Yeah.
Or is it just in their head?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And so as you going through it, did you kind of also discover certain things that, or maybe change certain views in yourself? I mean, I'd be also curious to see the two versions of your book, the early like young version, like when
Yeah.
you're younger, and now, and so to see the differences there, between them.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge difference because I
Okay.
had a few chapters written and put aside, and then I rewrote all of them, right? And then just
Hmm.
added a ton of that extra
Hmm.
stuff. So yeah, I think there's the heart and soul, I think, of a couple of the characters that I had written about early on. Um, but I'd like to think with due humility that it's a more sophisticated story now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that it plays it like the characters in the book are flawed, and I think when people think about Muslims is that they think of us as, you know, like very bimodal, like, and very rigid
Hmm.
in our experience. And yet, if you ever know any Muslims, you recognize that we're people like anybody else. And we may have values that we kind of follow, but we are, as you said, also on spectrums of our
Hmm.
experience
Hmm.
as well, too.
Hmm.
And so these characters are flawed as well, too, and also unsure and also learning. And sometimes we think about, people are like, oh, like when people approach from a spiritual perspective, my ancestors. I mean, this depicts these ancestors as learning along the way too. Like they didn't know
Hmm.
better then either, right? And it's like
Hmm.
what to make of these things. And so I think it's interesting because this is a ghost story, but I think it says more about humanity than anything
Hmm.
else.
Yeah, it's also the idea like people who die in the afterlife, they have like they have access to more information, I would think, but it's not that they become enlightened. So
Yeah.
even if they interfere with things, and again, if you believe in that, which I find quite fascinating, the idea of the afterlife too, but those are
Yep.
not jinns. And so, how can we protect ourselves against jinns? Is there like incantations? Is there like magical rituals? Like what do people do in folklore? What do the people do in Zanzibar, maybe in today? And what can we do, the rest of us, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, according to Islamic theology, there are things that you say in the Quran that help protect you, but they
Uh-huh.
don't protect you from the jinn. They protect you from like the devil,
Okay.
right? So that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah.
But there's an element of acceptance in Islamic culture that you are going to run into the supernatural, and you can do or say things. And there's a verse in the Quran that is like most commonly used. They refer to it as the verse of the throne of God. And Muslims believe that if you recite this verse, that
Mm.
it protects you from the devil.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but it doesn't say anything about the jinn.
That's
So
interesting. Oh my goodness, we're left on our own. Do our angels protect us? Our guardian angels? Can they help us in this?
I mean, so I'll speak in perspectives, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
speak in definitives,
Sure. Sure.
but according to Islamic culture and Islamic theology, that yeah, we do have, we do believe in like the three angels, the one who, the ones who write down our positive or good deeds and ones who write down our failings. And then there's the guardian angels that follow us. But the same Islamic theology also says that we have a jinn that follows us around, right?
Right.
As well too.
At the
So
same time. Oh my God.
at the
Okay.
same
But
time,
could be a good one though,
yes, it could be actually. It could be.
Granting wishes.
Granting, wouldn't that be lovely? That would be lovely. Um,
I read something about angel blades. Does that help? Because you can buy them, I think, online. Angel blades. These are
oh
like
no, I've never
smokeless.
heard of
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
I've never heard
So
of that. I've never heard of
maybe,
that.
maybe I should get one of those.
Sure.
I had someone who talked about being possessed on the podcast too,
Okay.
and so I got actually a cross just in case when I was
Oh.
talking to him, and there are
Oh.
experiences that are very that defy reason. And I think that's something like really should open up so we look things like you say in an open way and don't dismiss it already if it doesn't fit into our
Yeah,
category. It's like, oh, that's definitely wrong. So there's some things that are really creepy that do happen in this
it
realm.
is. Well, I mean, out of the fictional world,
Hmm.
I think it's important um, that we're thoughtful about our guardrails,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
how it's good that we have scientific rigor
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
guide our thinking, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the rigor don't become blindfolds
Yes.
that prevent the ability to learn.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the heart of this. Um, there's
And
like,
it doesn't hurt to get an angel blade or to pray, have a few prayers, It's like as long as you don't hurt anyone with it, of course.
yeah,
But that's the thing. Like if it doesn't hurt, why not? I mean, as a psychologist too, it's like, you can include that. I just recently watched this series Luck about horse racing, and this guy is really stressed, and he's talked to a medical doctor, and the medical doctor says, "Well, do you have someone you talk to?" And he said, My horse." And the doctor is like, okay, well, that's good enough. You have someone to talk to,
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that kind of openness, I think, too.
Well, absolutely. But I think that openness has to come from a cultural perspective of
Hmm.
what's important to people, and culture will vary over course of time. I always
Hmm.
say that culture is not a static thing; it
I
changes
agree with that.
over time.
Yes, exactly.
And those of us who are from the diaspora really have this balancing act of culture that we often do, where we hold more than one side of who we are.
Well, it's so much richer because of it, not to
Yeah.
brag, but I think it's
Yeah.
like you have different perspectives and different lenses. I speak five different languages, so I can just shift in a different mentality because of that, and that
Yeah.
that's kind of a superpower.
Yeah, I think it is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there is a lot of opportunity um, that we can continue to have, you know, ideas about, thoughts about. And I didn't write this book as a professional book, right? Like this book
Hmm.
is the disclaimer is this is not a book by which people should be taking scientific guidance.
Hmm.
This is a fictional story that helps us consider ideas that are fun and enjoyable, and,
Yes, fun.
and
Yes.
maybe get us to reflect on the inside a little bit about who we are as people.
And you defy genres too. It's not just one specific genre, right? It's a mix of different things. Like a
Yeah,
haunting story, but it's a family drama perhaps, and
it is, yes. And I think there's a psychological element,
as well.
and there's very much magical realism in this. I've always loved magical realism,
Yes,
that
yes, I love it.
the magic is the context. It's not the
Yeah,
heart of the story, it's just the
yeah.
background. And yes, this is a ghost story, but the heart of what's happening is less about the supernatural and more about the I think like the heart of it is I don't know if I want to say trauma, but this human growth,
Yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
a result of the challenges people face. Be the characters, be human or Jinn.
Hmm. I'm definitely intrigued, but your book has received praise from the tribal king of Atui. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that
Was
was
that recently? That's
it was
awesome.
recently. I was literally right before release day, actually. Yeah, I got to know him. I had done some work for the American Psych Association. I was the chair for the Committee of International Relations, and part of that meant that you were at the United Nations at one point for a little bit. And somebody pointed it out, and that's the tribal king of Hawaii over there. I'm like, well, I'm gonna go say hello. And
Hmm.
so him and I have been on texting terms and periodically staying in touch since that time. And so
Hmm.
when I wrote this book, um, I said, would you by chance read it and see what you think? And he wrote me a very nice endorsement, but what was really nice, what was helpful for me to understand out of that was the experience of most of us who come from non-Eurocentric cultures.
Yeah.
You know, we have a lot in common, right? And there was a lot that he related to in this book,
Mhm.
about the intuitive experience and the supernatural experience and that being traditional knowledge. And that was nice
Yeah, of
that it
course.
touched him in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, royal improvement. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And also in the Middle East, it's doing very well. It's a bestseller in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, it's the number one bestseller on Kindle
Wow.
under Middle
Wow.
Eastern literature. So yeah.
And so it resonates with people, right? Where it's like, especially because of the themes and the way you're presenting it.
Well, these are stories that we don't talk about.
Mhm, mhm,
So I mean, like over 80% of published authors in Canada and the US are white.
mhm,
Where's the room for the cultural storytelling for the rest of us?
mhm.
So I do think that there's great opportunity for people and space for these kinds of conversations, and these kinds of stories, be it literature or film. Um, yeah, and that's part of the reason I wrote this too, because I felt like the story of, the place in the world that my family originally came from needed to be told, in its fullness, and this story is also partially that.
And you also, just bringing you back home, you're also one of the 100 most fascinating Manitobans of 2024. So
That
that's really cool.
that was a bit of a surprise last year. Yeah.
That's awesome. So all around, yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Rehman Yousuf Abdulrehman, for this fascinating discussion. I want to remind everyone that you're a clinical psychologist. You're also a best-selling author, and you wrote the novel Jinn in the Family. Are you thinking of diving into more fiction too, based on this? Is
Yeah, I mean, as I
sequel
said,
maybe? Jinn in
yeah,
the Family too?
number two, yeah. I find the writing very therapeutic. I love it a
Mhm,
lot. So I'll probably do some of that, but we'll see how well this book does. And
mhm.
if there's an appetite for it, then yeah, at some point in the next few years, maybe I'll get to a second version of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the Rash's World here.
Thanks for having me.